At this point, I've taken all of the pieces that made up the hull and separated them out into their own folder. And so here I'll just cycle through the different pieces. So these are all the different pieces, and they put together formed the hull, not the guns, but all these ones that are in this folder. So then once that is done, I just do a merge visible on it, which gives me a one subtool that has all of these parts merged together. Now, even though they're merged together, they're still separate objects. So what you would need to do at that point is a Dynamesh it. So here I've created a version of that. So I've just basically brought in the merged version and then just Dynameshed it. And by Dynameshing it, what that will do is it will combine them all into one piece. So now this is one solid piece, even though it is comprised of all those different designs we combined. Okay, so at that point, the next thing we would do is go back in here and do a little bit of sculpting. Nothing really major, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the transparency here so you can see that better, which is here I've done a little bit of poly painting as to where the legs are going to emanate from. And then I also made an attempt to poly paint the hatch in the back and how it's going to look. So did a little bit of work here, but it's still in Dynamesh mode. And then I figured that I needed to sculpt on it. So I wanted to minimize the number of polygons while maintaining this form. And for that, I zero meshed it. So here, this is a zero meshed version of the model. And I can see here that it is about 239,000 polygons, so it's pretty light, and it doesn't have a lot of dots on it. It's one subdivision level, and this is where I will start sculpting in the different forms. So here I've sculpted in the hatch, and later on I will use panel loops or some other function to separate this out so it can open, or at least be able to make enough of an indentation in the cut lines to make it seem like it's a separate piece. And then just going in here, and I have Sculptress mode Pro mode on. So at this point, I will just go ahead and use the brushes that we use for sculpting. So Damien Standard is a really good one for doing sculpting on a hard surface and just creating those indentations. And here, I'm just basically thinking about what different parts would be. So obviously, these two things over in the back here would be ammo feeds, and they would be separate parts. So I basically can start just roughly drawing that out so I can put it in a separate part. I don't know if I'm going to keep this vent in the back, or this kind of, it looks like some sort of ailerons or something like that, and I don't really think I would need them, so I would figure out a way to maybe make this into some sort of a mechanism that feeds the ammo, and then trying to figure out if there are any separations here where seams need to be, if there are any rivets or whatever, where they would be placed and whatnot. So at this point, I'm just basically sketching on the model itself, just using Damien Standard brush. And I could also be doing this with the paint mode too. So I could be using the paint brush as well with paint to delineate this. But I think it helps me just refine the shape more if I'm actually sculpting instead of painting on the entire piece. So here, what I'm looking for is trying to figure out if this part over here in the back is going to be separate or if it's going to be attached. Obviously, I've decided to make this part right here be separate somehow, and you know, probably most of this is going to be one piece welded together on the outside, but there still are different pieces that have to come into play. And one of the common things that tends to happen is that people put cut lines where indentations are, and I was kind of falling into that trap, so to speak, by drawing that line there, but I figured that was not a good idea. So one thing I figured is also that the leg mechanism would probably have to detach somehow, just like a car's engine detaches. So this whole leg mechanism could be detached from the unit for repair or modifications or whatnot. So here I'm just figuring out how to add some cut lines to facilitate that. And so that would be a kind of a more learned way, I guess, to separate pieces out instead of just drawing arbitrary lines. And here I'm just basically figuring out ways that these would open up as panels. I still need to put in the sockets of where the legs would emanate from, but they don't really need to be anything complicated. Probably some sort of a spherical thing would be sufficient there. So here, just doing some minor sculpting. Again, not really worrying about it's not going to be fine. It's basically determining secondary forms inside of this big primary form. And another thing I also did was I brought in a couple of helper pieces here. So I brought in a couple of cylinders that way and a cylinder that way, and these are basically telling me where that swiveling part is going to be for the guns. And if I bring them up here, it will make a lot more sense. So here I have this, not these two, but I think they're still in this folder. I have the guns and the legs and whatnot. So these pieces over here, those cylinders basically signify how this is going to be hinged. So this whole part here, and I think if I turn on transparency and show the cylinders, you'll get a better idea, is that this part right here, and I didn't mean to hide this, let me bring it back. And I think ghost mode might make this show off better. Yep, here we go. So you can see here these three cylinders. This one indicates how these top guns are going to swivel all the way around. So that's a 360-degree rotation. And then these ones are the swivels that will be the ones where this whole back part folds back down and the guns fold down as well. So these types of articulation aspects are things that I think about at this point, because I might want to present this mech in different configurations. So if I model those parts separately, then they could be moved and configured. And also, if this was going to be going into some sort of a game or something like that, these are already set up for the rigger to be able to rig them. So at this point, all I need to do here is just go ahead and start working on this piece, just like I was, to determine all of the different cut lines. And then once I'm done with that, I will come back with the next video where we will see how we separate those pieces apart. Also, we have to start making the legs. So at this point, the considerations are that these four legs are going to be the exact same leg. So I just need to make one of them, and then I can use mirroring and symmetry to get all four. And then the front legs and the hind legs are going to be separate, but again, I just need to make one of each. And after that, I will have the entire piece that I need for the legs. And of course, I'll have to consider how those legs are going to go into these sockets. And even the legs themselves, I'll make them into separate pieces as well, because somebody might want to rig it, or I might want to create an interesting pose with this. So that's something that I definitely will do. Now, the next thing also is I would have to model these guns and also this part on top. So we have quite a few things to do. So let's get started. At this point, I've gone ahead and carved in all of the cut lines. And again, you don't really have to be very accurate with this, just kind of parting it out as to what the separate parts are going to be. So here, I basically cut out where the hatch is and how it would open. And so it's just kind of a rough way of doing this. And also here, I'll turn on polyframe so you can see it. I've used Sculptress Pro mode. So even though I zero mesh this once just to get even topology, you can see here that I do have a little bit of tessellation going on, and that's because I just wanted the lines to be more available to me, and for that I basically used the Damien Standard brush, and I also turned on Sculptress Pro mode. So at this point, I pretty much have the parted hull the way I want it to be, more or less. And at this point, I can go down two different avenues, and if this is going to go into a game, I would need low-res topology for it, and I would have to manually retopologize, and I can either do that in ZBrush using Z-Sphere retopology, or I could go into Maya and use Quad Draw, and I'll show you a little sample of that in a minute. However, for this project, it's just going to be a concept piece, so ZeroMesher would actually be a faster way to go. And also, I'll be going down that direction, and that's the way we're going to move and progress. Okay, so first thing I would do is I would get this into some sort of a lower res version, so I could either Dynamesh it or ZeroMesh it, and then I'd load it into Maya. And in Maya, it would just come in like something like this. For example, let me hide that. It would come in like something like this, right? So, and then what I would do is I would select this model and make it live by clicking on this magnet over here. So selecting it as an object first and then clicking on it to make it live. And now that it is a live object, I can also see if it's symmetrical. In this case it is. So I'm going to go ahead and turn symmetry on for object X. And then use the modeling toolkit, which basically is here under Edit Mesh. I'm sorry, Mesh Tools, and it would be here. Show Modeling Toolkit would be the option that would be available if it wasn't already showing. So here, when you click that, it will show up, and you can either dock it like I have here on the right, or it could be floating, doesn't matter. But basically, the command I need here is Quad Draw, which is a really nice retopology tool, probably my favorite of all the different ones out there, and I've used quite a few of them. But I prefer Quad Draw because it's as simple as just clicking on adding dots onto where you want on the mesh. And since the mesh is live, it will stick to it, and then basically holding Shift down to get a polygon. So here I'm just placing 2 more dots down and pressing Shift to get that polygon. And I can also use the Tab key to extend this out this way. So between these two options of just placing dots and moving them, and also the ability to extend out faces and edges is really a really great way of doing it. Here it looks like I need an extra edge loop, so I'm just going to move this over to the edge here, and then if you hold Control down, you can add that extra edge loop over here. And this process is really fast and very, very organic. So if I'm going to manually retopologize something, this is probably the way I would go. So here we go. I'm just basically very quickly retopologizing this. And this would be, the way to do it is pretty simple. Quad Draw is one of the simplest tools to learn. However, putting down the right topology is one of those things where you learn with experience. And the more you do it, the more you understand form and geometry, the better you would get at doing these retopology options. So this is basically the way to do it, and you would do this for the entire mesh over here. And Quad Draw does lend itself to only drawing quads, so you will have a quadded model at the end, and it will be what you would need. So here I'm just going to do this part real quick, and then I've actually went down this path earlier, but again, since this is going to be a concept piece, I don't really know if that would be a necessary thing to do. So what I did is actually decided to go down the route of having this be just use Dynamesh, or sorry, ZeroMesher to do the retopology. Okay, so this is how you would do it, and I have a version here, so I'm just going to go ahead and select this version and hide it, and unhide a version that I started earlier. And I might continue this if at any point in time anybody wants this to be a game asset or something like that. I started to do a more manual retopology here. So I basically start out and make sure I get with the flow of this mech. And then once I'm done with that, I try to simplify it as much as I can, and that will be my low-res cage or my starting point of the topology. But again, we're not going to go down this path. I just thought it'd be a good idea to show it, just in case you are modeling mechs or designing mechs for a game, that this option is available to you. And there are quite a few other retopology tools out there that you could look into. But in our case, we're just going to go ahead and use ZeroMesher to get this part done. So to get this into some sort of a multi-level topology, or a way where we can have a lower res version of it and a higher res version of it, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to retopologize this using ZeroMesher in ZBrush, which is basically a one-button process. So here I have the original, And so to ZeroMesh it, I need to go down to the Geometry tab in the Tool menu, and under ZeroMesher, turn on Detect Edges. Since this is a hard surface model, Detect Edges really helps get those edges aligned with the hard surface edges of the model. And I usually just leave everything pretty much as the default for starters, and then do a ZeroMesh. And this takes a little bit of time, so I've actually gone ahead and done it earlier. And what I get is a result like this. So let me just solo that out. So the ZeroMesh version is this, and to get to this level of subdivision, meaning to get to a lower level of subdivision here, what I do is choose another option here in the ZeroMesher menu, which is the half option. So if I click on half over here and ZeroMesh again, that will give me a reduced number of polygons, and I can keep doing that until I get to a point to something like this where I basically have the entire volume but not have any of the features destroyed. So this is a point where I'm going to be stopping at, and for the most part I think ZBrush does a good job with this. Of course I can help it along with ZeroMesher guides or other ways, but here, just in the kind of the interest of moving this forward and getting a good enough result, I'm just going to leave it at that. So after I get this level of subdivision level, then what I do is divide the model. So just divide it. And it doesn't matter if you have smooth on or off here, but you just continue to divide it. And then once you get into higher subdivision levels, then what you can do is project this old one onto this new shape, right? So basically you just have these two visible, and then the one that's selected is going to be the one that's going to be projecting its vertices onto this shape. So here I just have these two on. And in the subtool menu here on the bottom is where you can choose to project the projection of the high-res model onto the low-res. So you can choose a distance here. 0.2 to 0.4 is usually good for me. And then click on Project All, and that will project that shape onto it. And then start dividing it or moving up in subdivision levels, and continue to do that until you get to a subdivision level where you feel you have enough polygons. So here I've got about the original has about looks like about just short of 1 million polygons, and this one has about 7 million, it seems like. So that's actually not bad. Sometimes you get some anomalies like this, but you can easily use the smooth brush to smooth them out. And it's better to smooth these out at lower subdivision levels. So here it's easier to smooth the shape out at a lower subdivision level and then reproject. And then once you do that projection, you will get a better result, and then keep moving up step by step in the subdivision levels to get to where you want. So at some point, we basically get a model that has the shape that we want, so the exact shape of the initial model that we started with, and also it has a array of subdivision levels. So we can go to lower subdivision levels when we can UV it. So this would be easier to UV. And also it's easier to manage different details when you have a lower subdivision version of your mech. At this point, I've got a low res cage, about 7,000 polygons, and I've divided it quite a few times to get to level 6. And again, while doing that, I'm projecting the original shape. And at level 6, this model has a poly count of about 7.8, or about 8 million polygons. And it's a lot of polygons, but it's also the main part of the mech, so I'm okay with it. And it should be okay. And the other thing I've also done here is I've gone ahead, and I'll turn polyframe off. I've gone ahead and done some sculpting on it, sculpted in some cut lines and some surfaces to see that at this subdivision level I am getting the level of detail that I want. The back part of the mech is still soft because I haven't really sculpted on it, but this front part is a part where I basically just sculpted on it using 2 or 3 different brushes, mostly the H-polish brush, which is good to create these type of hard surfaces, and then I can just go between the 2 edges here to sharpen an edge like I'm doing here, right? And then using the either the Damien Standard or the MAH cut, and this is, I think, available online if you look for it. MAH cut. It's pretty nice a brush to add these cut lines. So I've basically added these separations and cut lines using that, and used H polish to get these hard surface surfaces. And at this point, another thing I like to do is do a bit of poly painting, and for that I can go up to a subdivision level or down to a subdivision level where it makes sense. I don't know if I need to do that at level 6. I could probably get away with doing it at level 4 or 5. I'm just going to switch to 4 here, and also switch to the paintbrush. And so make sure here RGB is on and not mRGB, and also make sure that Z add and Z subtract are off. Of course, that is if it's a standard brush, but the paint brush automatically does all that for you. So here's my paintbrush, and then maybe I'll choose a different color like this one over here, and then start painting different sections in different colors. And the reason why I'm doing this is because once I have these in different colors, and they don't really have to, it's not the final coloring of the mech by any means, it's just a way to separate out these parts. Since I didn't manually topologize this, if I'm going to UV it, which I am, to load it into maybe Substance Painter or load or use different materials in KeyShot. Since I'm going to do that, I do need UVs, and so doing things this way, like painting them, and then doing a polygroup by paint, will allow me to get these as separate UV shells, and then I can either assign different materials to them for KeyShot, or have them as UV shells for Substance Painter. Okay, so one trick is that if you are coloring like this, and I'm bleeding out here to the orange area, is that if I want to correct this, I would have to switch back to the orange color. But if I have both of these loaded as different swatches, if I press Alt down, that will switch to the other color. So here it's switched to the orange, so I can get sharper edges. Again, these don't need to be super sharp, but I don't want some some very serious bleed over. I definitely want to keep it relatively sharp. So here, just painting the different edges, so I can switch back and forth again between the one color and the other color by using the Alt key and having that other color be the second swatch over here. And so that part's done. So let me pick another color now. Let's say I pick a green color, and let's let ZBrush do its quick autosave here. While that's happening, I can explain a couple of things, and that is that you want to keep these colors a little bit different than each other. So here I'm going to be choosing more of a darker green, and then for this one I'm going to pick orange and switch these colors. So here I'm painting with the dark green, like so. And if I want to basically have this edge be the one that's the different color, I can always go in here and turn that orange to this. So I'm going to try that first, just to show you. Okay, so now I'm basically painting this part green, and I'm dealing with this edge, this border, with this part right here. Right, and then if I need to correct it, I press Alt down and switch to the other color. And now that I'm done with and finished with this edge, the edge with the kind of the beige color that I had, I can go ahead and switch this beige color to the orange, and now I can deal with this border right here. Okay, and this process is pretty quick. It's just a simple paint process. And I think there's ways of automating this as well, but I like doing it manually because it helps me get more familiar with the different shapes of the mech, and also gets my mindset ready for the next stage, which is refining the rest of the mech, which here is a lot softer, to be more detailed and more refined like this one. And here, let me just finish painting this part up. So here, if I again need to modify these edges, I can always hit Alt and go to that orange. So now here I've got another piece that is a different color. And I can just cycle through different colors like this to get the final result. And just like before, I've actually done this off camera because I think I get the idea across by just painting a few of these, but I didn't want to paint the whole thing on camera, so I just did that separately and came out with a result like this. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is kind of what you want to have, is something more like this. And I think here I might need to add one more color. And I'll switch over to, let's say, a red color like this, and maybe I'll paint this part that color. So basically, you know, just a very, let's pick the beige for this. Just a very quick process of coloring your mech to these different colors, and what that will do is it will allow you to easily separate it out later on into separate polygroups once it's time to paint it. So you can do this later on too, but I like doing it initially just because it helps me remember what the different parts are and what they're and helps me kind of get more familiar with my design for the future stages that are coming up. But yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process, the painting process. And again, I'm not really going to be using these as colors for the mech itself. I might use it as some sort of a maybe in development phase coloring, but for the most part, it's just so I can go ahead and UV these later on. So here I'm switching to the gray for this part right here. And so there it is. Basically, at the end of the day, you end up with something like this. Don't be too precious about the edges here. You know, if there's a little bit of bleed over, you can always fix that later on. But this basically gives me the general biggest parts of the mech, and that way I can go in and paint them, or I can go in and separate them out as UVs and also use them for different functions later on. If I even need to separate them out as parts, I can do that as well, but having this type of a view at some point is really valuable. And here, I don't know why there's orange down here, so I'm just going to paint this. I think this might have been a work in progress version and not the final version, which is fine. There's a few things that I needed to change, but it kind of gives me, it gives you an idea of all the different things that need to be done to get this to this type of a stage where you have the different colors. When we are done with the different painting of the parts, we can at that point move on to sculpting the hard surface shapes. So I'm just going to hide the poly paint for now. We'll go back to it later. And here I've got a I've got my the hull of the mech, and what we want to do here is start sculpting on it. So I've already done a little bit of sculpting of hard surface stuff from before, and also some of it is coming from medium. So I have a bunch of stuff to make conform more to a hard surface shape. Now I'm going to do a few things here. One is I'm going to change this to a basic material 2, which gives me a little bit more specular, makes this look a little bit more shiny, and I like that because I like to see how the spec is showing up on all the different corners. So it's a good material to do that with. And also I have my light over here that I can move it around the surface to see where it is. So I'm just here, I'm going to leave it on the top corner over there. And then the other thing I want to do is make sure that I have my brushes loaded. So 4 of the brushes that I use for hard surface are in my custom menu, which is over here. So my custom menu basically is just a menu that I created, and there are plenty of tutorials, as I mentioned before, online on how to create your custom ZBrush user interface. So in mine, I just have a hotkey that brings up this menu that I use all the time, and it's got the brushes that I use most of the time. And even in this tutorial, during the time I recorded this tutorial, my custom user interface has changed and evolved. So if people ask me for it, I tend to not want to give it to them because I'm always evolving mine. And again, people should be creating and using their custom user interface based on the tools they want to use. Okay, that said, I just wanted to point out that in my custom user interface, I've got all of the brushes that I use for hard surface in one row. So H polish, planar cut, trim normal, and trim hole are the 4 that I use, in addition to clip curve. So with just these 5 brushes, I can do a lot of work. And these brushes are either in the brush menu, and if they're not, and I think they are, but if they're not, you can also find more of them if you go to your Lightbox. And I've got my Lightbox UI down here somewhere, so I'm just going to launch it from Preferences here. But it's just that big Lightbox button that usually is in the top corner over here in your UI. So here under Preferences, Lightbox, I'll go ahead and launch it. So here under Lightbox and Brush, you notice that you have an option of a bunch of planar brushes. And then you also have a lot of other brushes that could be used for hard surface that are in different menus. So I think there's a few under flatten. There could be a few under trim. So it all depends on the ones you want to use. So that's basically what I recommend is try the different hard surface brushes, and if you like the ones that I use, I think they have proven themselves super useful for me in most of the hard surface projects that I've been on. Okay, so the workhorse of all these is H-Polish, and H-Polish is really great in making things planar. So for example here, I've got this bit of chatter over here, and if I go over it with H-Polish, it straightens it out. And same here. So if I want this to be more of a kind of a planar surface, a more hard surface looking, I can just use H-Polish to get that look. And H-Polish you can use in 2 ways. You can either use it by just clicking and dragging on the surface, and of course if you use it with Alt, then that will bring the surface underneath up. So here I'm establishing some sort of an angle, and then making this more of a faceted look over here where it was really soft earlier. Okay, so it's super, super useful, and it's probably the brush I use the most with hard surface projects because it gets me great results. Now the thing with H-Polish is that when you are sculpting, it does give you a plane, but it's not a coplanar plane. And what I mean by that is that the plane could be curved. So here you can see this surface here is coplanar. However, maybe the surface we just sculpted seems like there's a little bit of a curve over here. And you can, if you look at it from a different angle, you can see that there's a little bit of a curvature over here. And if I go over it again and again with the H-Polish brush, it will, over time, become flat. But you might want to do that in a faster way. And for that, I use the trim normal. And what trim normal will do is it basically establish a few normals. So you sample a few normals, and then after that, it basically will flatten everything out to that level. So here, if I want this to be completely flat, I'll say, okay, well, I want it to be based on this area right here. So I just basically will sample that area. So when you sample that area, then you basically will, once you go outside of that yellow circle, from that point on, you will be sculpting that same level. So now I know everything I'm sculpting on is coplanar. And it works with Alt as well. So if I want to lift up the surface that was underneath, with Alt, that brings it out. Okay, so then I do that, switch back to H-Polish, and then get those corners. And I need to make sure I don't sculpt on this area. So you saw how this got indented. So I want to make sure I don't sculpt on that area. So I either can make my brush size smaller, which I should do here, or another thing you can always also do is just quickly mask that area over here. And I think I've got lazy mouse on for a mask. Let me turn that off. So you can just mask that one area over here. And so you don't touch it. And then you can just use H-Polish to make these angles better. Clear the mask there and straighten this out like so. Okay, so so that's how trim normal is really useful. And then planar cut is really good too, because planar cut also, once you click on a surface and you keep moving your mouse back and forth, once you establish a plane, it will stay on that plane. So here I'm going to do the same here. And if I want to bring out this one part, I can do it and then just fix it. Okay, and again, a lot of these brushes, you can go into the samples area and choose whether you want build up or not, and also you can choose in the brush modifiers whether you want any of these settings to affect it. So for me, I basically use them mostly generically. Sometimes I turn off the build up under samples. And I'll show you that with the trim hole in a minute. So here, let me just fix this one little area that I had come up. And then here I'm going to again use the H polish to get this to be more of a surface this way. So over time, as I'm working on this model, I can establish the different planes, and then I can determine what I want to be coplanar and what I want to be not coplanar. So here, this one area, I'm just going to use smooth to smooth it out and create that corner. And if I want a sharper corner, there's again two ways of doing it. One is using H polish and coming at that corner from two sides. So I can show that here in this area. So if I want this corner to be sharper, I can just sculpt on this top plane and then the side plane, and then I get that sharper corner. And I'm going to do that with this over here to get a sharp corner right here, like so. Okay, and again, with this material, I can see the specular highlight, and it's showing me that I've got a pretty nice sharp corner over here. Right, and that's basically it. And another thing you can also do is if you want that corner to pop out, you can always use Damien Standard and just go in here, and I'm using it with Alt, and just bring out that corner a little bit like so, and then just use H polish to get it to conform more. So now I've got even a pointier corner in that corner. Okay, so basically these are the brushes that I use. The other two that I didn't talk about yet, which are trim hole and clip curve, are really useful too. Clip curve is great because when you choose it, it replaces Control Shift. It basically Control Shift, the default is select rectangle, so it replaces that. And if I want to basically make a angular cut, so here if I'm looking at the front of the mech and I decide, oh well, I want it to have this corner not be so sharp, or the bottom corner not be so sharp, maybe let me see if I can find something more that I would think would work better. So let's say this back corner over here, if I don't want it to be that sharp, I can just hold Control Shift down and draw this line. And if I hold Shift down, this line locks at 15-degree angles, which is useful for a hard surface. If I let go of Shift, then I've got 360 degrees of movement. And the shaded side, so here the top shaded side of this line is going to be clipped away, right? So, and if you hold spacebar, you can move the line around, and here I'm just going to place it over here, get a good angle for this back angle, and let go. And it churns for a little bit, and then basically it cuts that shape out. So you can see here, and I can show it here on the other side, it just cut this piece out. And I'll undo so you can see it better. So there was this corner, and now that corner is chipped off like this. So clip curve is really good for kind of doing planar cuts and getting surfaces to look like this. Okay, and then the last but not least is trim hole, which is really, really useful for creating hard surface features like screw holes or protruded screw holes. So I'm going to go ahead and choose trim hole, and build up for that I think is on by default, but you can also turn it off to get some interesting effects. So here, let's say I want some screw holes in the front part, and I should mention that with trim hole, it depends on your camera angle. So whatever angle you're coming at it from, that's the way it's going to make the hole. So here, I'll go ahead and do it. So it's making the holes based on the camera angle that I have. And if I have the camera angle this way, on that same surface, that hole is going to look completely different. So the camera angle and the way you're looking at your model definitely matters with trim hole. So make sure you get it at the angle you want. So here, for example, if I want to add those screw holes, I can just go ahead and do that from this camera angle. And it creates really interesting features like this. And then I can just kind of keep burrowing in to create that screw hole. And the other thing that's nice about it is also that you can use it the other way. So here I'm just going to undo back to this state, and I'm going to use the trim hole with holding Alt down, and that builds it up. And these kinds of features are really cool for hard surface, and you can kind of pair that up. So you can actually have it protrude, and you can have it cut in like this, and then you can even make this smaller and then make a screw hole like that, or it could be a gun hole or whatever. Trim hole is really useful for creating features like this. And between all those different brushes, I think I get 90% of what I want to sculpt in hard surface. Okay, so at this point I have pretty much sculpted this. I have a deadline to meet, so I would usually go in and work on this a little bit more, but for the most part here, I'm just going to use H-polish to get the surfaces that I want and make sure there's no glaring issues. I think I ironed out the shape pretty much in the previous videos and in medium, so I'm going to go ahead and just accept this. There's going to be plenty of other things to look at, so I can hide some of the imperfections that I see here later on. And again, depending on how much time you have in the project, you can go in and refine this a lot more as time goes on. So I will switch to, after I just finish a couple of other things that I see here, I will go ahead and switch to the next thing that I do to make this look more realistic. So this looks okay, but it still doesn't look like it's really made of some sort of metal. So if you look at a tank or something like that and the surface looks like this, especially since I've got basic material 2, which makes it look oily, it doesn't really look exactly like this. So if I want this to look a little bit more realistic, the other thing that I usually do is add some surface noise. And ZBrush has a really great way of doing that by using surface. Before I do that, I just want to add very quickly here a second light. So I'm going to go up to the light menu here, which I've docked, and turn on a second light, which will act more like a fill light. So I've got my key light over here to the top left, and I'll add a secondary light, a fill light, so I can see the noise a little bit better. And I can move this to any area. It's about at 0.25 and augmented with a 0.85, which equals 1, which is a good number to have for lighting. And so here we go. We will go ahead and go into the tool menu here and scroll down to where it says surface. And surface is where the noise is, and then we'll go ahead and turn that on, which will bring up this window. Now with the default noise, it looks like this, which is okay. And I can modify the scale of this noise to be a little bit smaller, which will be very close to the result I want, and that might work. But in my case, I actually want to reduce that noise down to 0 because there's two noise aspects to ZBrush. There's just the regular noise, and then there's the noise plugin, which adds some more noise aspects to it. So I'll go ahead, and before I do that, there's also a variation in the noise. I guess I can turn this back up a bit so I can show you. There's a variation in color. It's pretty subtle over here, and that color blend here is doing it, and it's basically going between these two colors. So I'm going to change one of these colors to a different color so we can see that difference in the color, and that makes it more obvious. So here, if I change the scale of it, you can see that the higher points have a more of a grayish color, and the lower points have more of the bluish purplish color. Okay, so but I'm going to reduce all the way the scale down all the way to 0, and I'm going to leave the color on so you can see that there's a little bit of a variation. And then when we turn the noise plug on, it will launch another dialog box, and this will help us see the noise on here better with the color variation. So here the default is a checkerboard, and as I change the scale of this checkerboard, you will be able to see that checkerboard noise coming in. Maybe that's a little bit too little, but you can see it over here. And checkerboard, of course, is not the one I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using this one right here called Perlin noise, and when I turn that on, you can see the type of noise it's generating. The scale is a bit too big here, so I'm going to start reducing it. I can do that in this dialog box right here, but this is an up arrow, down arrow, and I can do that exact same thing here under plugin scale with a slider, which is a lot better. And the only different variables that Perlin noise has are the ones over here. So I'm going to play around with these just a little bit to see what kind of effects I get. And again, I'm looking at the result over here. And there's a frequency here. I can change that as well. And that looks okay too. And then there's an amplitude. And again, these are just factors that affect the noise. And I'm just visually looking at them here with the two separate colors to get the idea of what they are doing. And I think I want to get a higher frequency of this, and maybe increase the octaves a bit and the amplitude, and I think I got this and it's okay. I don't like the scale, but again, instead of messing with the scale over here, I'm going to mess with it after the fact. So I can either do this by X and Y over here, so I can play around with these sliders to get the type of noise I want. But again, they don't really move together, so I can't lock them in. And Z is moving it through the object. So I can either play around with it over here like this, or I can just go and do it all in one shot later on. So I'm going to try and get it to a area that I really think is okay, like about there maybe. Click on OK. And then, so here are all the different things that I could do now. So the plugin scale, I can, again, just do that in one area. So here I'm moving it up and down until I get to a scale that I really like. So about there is good. And then I can play around with the strength of it. And again, I just want it to be a subtle surface noise. And at this point, I don't really need the color, so I'm going to change the color blend down to 0. So all I have is surface noise. And it's a good idea just to zoom into an area here. Let me just find an area up here maybe and move it around. So this has a similar navigation to the viewport, but I'm going to be using these buttons. Okay, and then you can see here that the scale, at some point it gets to be like this, where you get that waves type of thing going on, and that's not really what I want. So I'm going to try just typing in 0.02 here, see how that fares, and that looks a little bit too weak. And the strength, maybe I can increase that a bit. And I'm getting close here, and let me play around with the scale some more to maybe about there. Oops. Yeah, it's really hard to, and maybe I'll use this top slider to maybe not move as much in the range over here, and just get to an area where I do have some surface chatter, but I don't have a lot of it. I think this is okay for now. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. And so this basically shows up on my model. And again, it's just something to break up that kind of smoothness of the surface and give me a little bit of surface chatter. And here maybe choosing a greener color for my surface will make it show up more saturated, kind of like a dark army green. And now you can see with the two lights that I have, the type of surface that I've generated. And again, this is not applied to the model. So I can apply it at some point, but apply to mesh over here. But I'm not going to do it yet, because now I can also continue to sculpt on this and see what that looks like with the noise. So if I apply it and I sculpt on it, of course, that noise will be destroyed. So I don't want to destroy it. I want to just keep it. But I also want to continue to sculpt to see how things look with the noise, but also have that noise stay while I make surface changes. So this is another process that I go through to make the model look more hard surface. And you can see here it looks really kind of nice, because this is type of metal, maybe it's got some sort of paint or some sort of material on it to give it this bit of noise. Nothing really is very smooth. I mean, this is not a showroom car or anything like that, so we want that bit of, you know, military gruff on there. So you can see now I'm just basically using the same hard surface brushes we talked about earlier, but I am getting a result with noise. And eventually, once I'm happy with the sculpt of the surface, I can just go ahead and apply that noise and just have it be there. Also notice that the noise is applied in the different cut lines, and I don't want that either, so I can also remove that later on.